Alright, time for another DraftPhysics.com, DebatePhysics.com, also video presentation. So, during the debate with McToon, there was an after show, and this guy called PhD Tony needed to interject and somehow challenge me. And yes, it was just going to be a formulaic challenge. Okay, just, show me how their wrong formula is defended by a bunch of other wrong formulas. So it was going to be circular wrong formula night. And I didn't really want to play that. So I was making an argument about thermodynamics, and he called it incoherent babbling. So I just figure we'll give him an opportunity to defend that statement, defend himself as something other than a turd who just, ignores and lies. Okay, so, I don't want to get into some name calling argument. I mean, we should all be able to handle a few derogatory statements, and, I should be able to say, I think your physics is silly. Just like I could say your religion was silly or something else, and you should be able to handle that. And likewise, you want to argue I'm silly, that's fine, but you should make your argument in the context of my argument, which is I want to discuss experiments. Obviously, Toon didn't want to do that, okay? It wasn't interest to him. So even though he claims to be about the evidence, he doesn't want to discuss experiments. All right, so anyway, I'm going to give you a thought experiment and just ask you, this the very one you called babbling incoherently. All right, so the fact is, this is how so they agree, all right, that the Earth is creating a gravitational field. Now, they call it bent space, all right, so it's just some sort of idea that something, who knows what, is in some way changing space-time, and that is giving things momentum. And it's an absolute fact that things are given momentum, okay? They have a mass and a velocity created by movement in this, whatever it is, this bent geodesic thing that doesn't have any sourcing, okay? It doesn't, you don't have to fuel the bent geodesic. It doesn't need you to give it any energy or give it any fuel. It just creates this phenomenon for free, okay? And what's basically happening on the Earth is every time something hits the Earth, well, that's an impact. That will create energy in. And if it sticks, well, then it's going to be constantly generating pressure, weight. And the weight, essentially, the center of the Earth is so extreme that, and the weight is basically saying you have pressure coming from both sides. It's jiggling, okay? You can't destroy the energy, and the energy is a real thing. Now, you don't have to accept that the energy is actually a force a bit of momentum, something that never stops. But the idea of it being eternal is sort of accepted by physics, that the energy is indestructible. So you can't get rid of it. It can just keep forcing something to go this way, and then force it to go this way, and then force it to go this, because it has to keep moving. It can't stop moving. So the thing doesn't just stop because there's pressure on this side and pressure on this side. It doesn't just sit there and go, I'm not going to do anything. Obviously, on some atomic level or subatomic level, things have to keep moving because of the force never dies. You can just follow it where it goes. So anyway, so there's a whole bunch of this force, all right, preoccupied, you could argue, moving matter inside the Earth, little atoms, back and forth, moving them. So there's a whole bunch of this motion that is now consolidated in the center of the object. And obviously that center can be very large because it can be very hot. And so, yes, the core of the Earth is molten and at a temperature. The core of all the other planets is likewise molten and at a temperature. And big ones like Jupiter might be 6,000 degrees Kelvin, and little ones like Mercury, even though they're right next to the sun, they're only 2,000 degrees Kelvin. And the Earth is somewhere in between, 4 or 5. All right, anyway, even the moon, in the center is hot. Okay, there's a lot of action there. So the argument is that obviously, okay, there's this word called equilibrium. So it gets to a state where it's not getting any hotter. Okay, now the only way it can get hotter is it has to get bigger to get hotter. But it can't get hotter just being the Earth. So unless there's a whole bunch of junk for it to collect, it's not going to get any hotter. It has to collect more mass to get hotter. So it's excreting as much as it's absorbing. Okay? It's just that it excretes it later than it absorbs it. It absorbs it at time 0, let's say, and it excretes it at time 1. So there's an imbalance in the difference between the excretion of the energy and the absorption of the energy, and that's what the matter's being compelled or pushed by, is that deficit in time. All right. But regardless, you don't have to understand that to understand just the simple principle that there's a bunch of heat, okay, photons, let's just say, for the sake of simplicity, because it's empty space, and they can't transfer their heat through conduction. It has to transfer the heat or expel the heat through radiation. So the Earth is radiating as much energy as the pressure required to heat it to whatever, 5,000 degrees. And so it's radiating, okay, the same volume of energy. It's a pretty huge volume, actually, accounting for all of the gravitational differential on all of the surface of the Earth, and at the inverse square law projected into space. So it's a lot of an energy deficit. But regardless. And so right there, the second law of thermodynamics says the universe is going to run out of energy. Well, isn't this a perfect system? I am excreting photons that have no physical origin. That is, there was no in force, no in photon that made the out photon. You see this isn't called incoherent babbling. It's called pointing out there's a paradox in your argument, your system, your model. It's got an inefficiency in it. I get out real energy. Okay, we know that the photons are real energy, right? An infrared photon is a real hunk of momentum in the universe, and it's durable, it's indestructible. And I made it, okay? I created the momentum that made that photon out of a force that doesn't have any energy, right? Out of a mechanism, a bent geodesic did it. So logically, obviously, I'm arguing the force is real, and the entire universe is full of, gazillions of these objects radiating energy, and that what they're doing basically is, radiating the energy that causes the pressure differential. So the fact is that the energy comes out of objects, and other objects, just like this one, create the gravity, the pressure that heats the other objects. So they're all heating each other by just being in the universe full of all this radiant heat. Now the trick is some of this radiant heat has the cosmic background radiation, peaks in the microwave range. I think it's the high microwave, actually. So it's close to the border between infrared and microwaves. But the argument could be made, and that this cosmic background radiation does have, spectral lines that indicate a redshift, that somehow it was originally maybe photons and it's now been shifted to cause this effect. And that could simply be understood that if you have a crowded universe with a bunch of objects, and the masses and the energy that hits things doesn't stick, in the sense that it doesn't stay in the object, it radiates back out again. So all of this could just be the fact that the radiation is moving between all these different objects, and by the time it hits your planet, okay, it's been a lot of other places previously. And that's why the radiation has been redshift, is if it's traveled through a bunch of billions and billions and billions of light years of space, and in that travel it's encountered little hydrogen atoms, or you could even just argue protons, and it has scattered and lost a tiny bit of frequency with each one of those events, and that's what has degraded the frequency of the light. But you don't need to believe that either. Just understand the simple fact that gravity is much easily, it makes so much more sense to understand that the real photons are the real cause, and that if the photons, just like magnetism, a regular piece of matter can't see magnetism, can't tell that there's a magnet next to it, can't see it. And the fact is that radiation has a particular capacity to be effective based on how the arrangement of the electrons and protons are. And if I can just arrange them differently, then it is going to be affected by magnetism. So the difference between, a piece of iron that's magnetic and a piece of iron that's not a magnet is just the fact that you've rearranged the electrons and protons. So clearly it can be understood that the force is detectable based on the arrangement of the substance, and the same would be true for photons. So magnetism is what the arrangement is dependent, and also photons, visible photons, are likewise dependent, and that you could possibly have photons, broken photons you could argue, that would still have momentum, they'd still be hitting the object, but they don't have a signature that we can see, but they still are causing an effect. And that's clearly what my argument would be, is completes this cycle, that the conservation of energy really has to be that the energy being excreted by any kind of material object in space is exactly the energy that's compressing the other objects in space. Gravity causes it, okay? And gravity is being caused by being the input half of the energy cycle. And that's all it is. It's a cycle. Compression, expansion. Compression, expansion. The sun radiates out. It's a divergence. The gravity compresses in. It's a convergence. And there's just as much converging going on as there is diverging going on of energy in the universe, and therefore there is no thermodynamic catastrophe. Alright, so I won't make it any longer than that, but he called that incoherent babbling. Okay, so to just make this argument that the bent space argument is kind of lame because it's not in the energy cycle, and so if you believe bent space gives matter momentum, then you have to explain, okay, how the net product would be there's more energy in the universe every time a meteor hits a planet. There's now more energy in the universe. Okay. Or a piece of sunlight. Or a piece of starlight. All of those things, okay, you have to account for as being, well, isn't that extra energy because you didn't create it with any energy? You broke the cycle, is the simple argument. So it seems just kind of obvious that the heat being radiated by objects is the same heat that's compressing objects. And it just has to do with the fact that the only way time is related to this whole subject is that there's a differential in the time. Energy goes into a material object and it is occupied, it is slowed down, and therefore it doesn't excrete at the same rate it goes in, because the in always happens long before the out. Alright. So, yes, the challenge to you is explain how that's incoherent babbling. Okay. It's not a real subject. It has nothing to do with reality. The fact that bent space isn't a source of energy, and yet it causes energy to manifest in gravitationally active bodies. Yeah, that's enough. Oh, I should have added, if you don't want to talk about this particular subject and want to choose some other portion of the menu of kinetic energy failures, these arguments that I'm making that were ignored completely in the debate. I mean, they're all right here. There's 14 5-minute videos on the basic sub-subjects of the different experiments, okay? And certainly the explanation of Galilean dynamics regarding gravity and the fact that, yes, it's a time-dependent force. So if you want to argue any of that, the videos are there, okay, debatephysics.com. And I'd appreciate it. So if you're going to say I'm talking rubbish, well, go ahead. Play one of the videos and explain how the videos are made out of rubbish. That there's some rubbish, that I'm saying rubbish sentences. Point out the sentence where I say something that's rubbish. All right? If you're going to talk the talk, you should be willing to walk the walk. If you're going to, open your mouth, and state your opinion, you ought to back it up with an explanation that has a little more detail in it than you're a fool or you're an idiot. That's really not a counter argument. So if you can't do better than that, then I'm just going to point out how, you fit the definition of somebody who looks like a coward and a weasel and a shit talker. So man up and deal with the real arguments, not your cheap paraphrase of the arguments.